So we'll start with step 1 of creating our custom error response class. And the name that I'll give for this class, I'll call it Student Error Response. All right, I'll expand the window here for a bit. And so remember, this is just our Pojo. We'll simply define the fields here for status, message, and timestamp. This is all very basic, very straightforward. All right, so those are our 3 fields that we have set up, kind of based on our UML diagram. And then the next thing I'll do is simply go through and define the constructors for it. So I'll start by just creating a default no argument constructor. And then I'll just make sure I have those 3 fields selected there, or just kind of do the select all, and then we're OK there, and we're ready to go. Just hit OK. And there we go. So we have these 2 constructors. And so I may not use all of them in this video, but I have them here, and just in case I need to use them later on in the future. So the next thing here is generating our getters and setters. And then we're ready to go with this portion of it. Alrighty, and there we go. I'll clean up some little extra white space here at the bottom. But that's basically about it. So we have our getters and setters, we have our fields, and we have our constructors. So we're in pretty good shape with this student error response. So we can say that step 1 is complete, and we can move on to step number 2. So with step 2 is simply creating a custom exception class for this example. And so again, in our REST package, we'll create this class here. Just create new class. And so this will be for our student not found exception. And I'll make a small mod here. I'll say extends runtime exception. Runtime exceptions from the java.lang package. And we kind of get that one for free. And basically all I want to do here is simply define a constructor here for this student not found exception. I'll actually generate the constructor from the superclass. Generate. Okay, so those are the 3 that we want. And again, I may not use all of them, but it's just good to have them in case I need to use them again in the future. And hit OK. All right, so that's my student not found exception. I can use this in my REST service when it's actually time to throw an exception if the student ID is a bad student ID or I can't find the given student. All right, so that's our custom. Okay, so we're making good progress. So we've already covered steps 1 and 2. Now in this video, we'll actually cover step 3 of updating our REST service to throw the exception if the student is not found. Okay, so let's go ahead and move over to our REST service here, our student REST controller, and we'll make those updates to throw the exception. So I'll kind of zoom out a bit. I'll expand my window over here. So I'm in my student REST controller, my REST service. I'll move down to that get student method. And so this is where I want to add some logic here to check the student ID. So I'll write a quick little comment here to myself. Alrighty, so I'm going to check the student ID against the list size, and I can do this with an if statement. So here I'll just check to see if the student ID is greater than or equal to list.size. Or if the student ID is less than 0. If that's the case, then I'm actually going to throw an exception. And so when I throw the exception here, I'll throw a new student not found exception. Again, that's our custom exception class we created earlier. And so I'll simply give the message, hey, I couldn't find a given student ID, and provide the actual student ID that we couldn't find. All right, so that's the basic coding there for checking that. So remember from that little diagram we have up top, so data comes in, bad data, then we're going to check that ID. And if it's bad, then we'll actually throw the exception. So that's a logic to kind of handle that part of it. And then if everything's A-OK, we make it past that if statement, then we simply return the students.get student ID. So that's a happy path. So they pass in a valid ID, we're A-OK, we simply get the student and return it accordingly. All right, so that's good stuff. So that kind of takes care of step 3 of throwing the exception. We're making good progress, so we've covered steps 1 through 3 so far. Now we'll cover step 4 of adding an exception handler using the exception handler annotation. So with this step 4 of adding an exception handler, that diagram we have in the top right, we have the code for throwing the exception, but nothing for handling the exception. So that's where we need to do this now. And we'll actually add this code in our student REST controller. We'll add an exception handler for this given application, and we'll make use of that add exception handler annotation. So I'll just get some white space here to kind of stretch out a little bit on the screen. I'll give this add exception handler annotation, and then I'll actually write out the method signature. And for now, just say return null, just to kind of give us some basics here, and then we can kind of focus in and drill down on some different parts of this coding. So remember, the add exception handler annotation says, hey, this method's an exception handler. We tell the actual response type, and then we also have the actual exception type as far as what we're going to catch. So here we're saying that this coding or this exception handler can handle or catch student not found exceptions. So we have the basic coding stubbed out. Let me just write some quick comments here to myself, just so I know what I need to do inside of this method. So I'll need to create the student error response and also return a response entity. Alrighty, so let me just go ahead and create a student error response. I'll just call the constructor here for this student error response. And remember, that's a custom error response object that we created earlier in some of the previous videos. And then I'll simply go through and just set the values here. So I'll set the actual status. That's the actual HTTP status code of not found. That means 404. Then I set the actual message for this error response to be whatever the exceptions message is. So I'll say exception.getMessage. And then finally, I'll set the actual timestamp. So I'll say error.set timestamp, and I'll get the current time in millis. All right, so that's the basic code in there for setting the appropriate values on this error response object. Okay, so now moving to this next area here, I need to return the response entity. So here I'm going to create a new response entity. And then I give the actual error, which is the body of the response, and then the actual status code for this response. So the status code will be HP status dot not found. So I give the body, comma, the actual status code. Let's run it because I want to see how things work and if the exception handling is working as desired. So I'm going to run this application real quick. And now just go ahead and give some good data just to start out, make sure that things are working as desired. So 0 and 2. Okay, that's good. Now let's try and break it with this 999 and cool, success. So that's the error response that we wanted. We wanted JSON error response. Now let's copy this URL and then let's go ahead and swing over to Postman and just see how it works out in Postman for us. So I'm in Postman, I'll move up here and I'll simply paste in that URL that I just copied. And then I'll just kind of hit the blue send button here. And oh yeah, looking good. So down here at the bottom, we have this JSON response for the error. So that's awesome. So again, mission accomplished here. And also in the top right, we have 404, not found. And that's great because that ID is not found, correct? And so we're giving the correct status code. And then you can test other bad IDs, like some really large numbers or whatever. You could also swing over and put in like negative numbers to see how that works out for us. So if we entered like a -5, then that should also handle accordingly with our exception handling code. So this is kind of cool. I'm excited. But we're not really done. There are some edge cases out there, and you may have discovered them already. If you enter some text characters for the student ID, like ABCD or XYZ or something, then that won't really work for our application. So we added some exception handling, but we didn't cover all of the edge cases. And we can get some more details by actually looking at the server logs to find out what exactly happened here. So this last line is a warning. And then we can kind of start scrolling over to the right with this error message. So it says failed to bind request, method, argument, type, mismatch exception. Interesting. Failed to convert value of type java.lang.string to required type of int. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? That ABC or that weird text that we entered, you can't really convert that to an integer. So that all makes sense, right? But we didn't give a good JSON error response. So we'll actually need to modify our code to handle for these edge cases, or kind of set up like a generic exception handler. So for any error that happens, we can catch it and then send back that response as JSON. And we'll actually cover that in the next video.